On this channel, I like to say that I eat bad arguments for breakfast. And when I say this, I usually mean it in a figurative sense. However, in this video, that phrase will be taking on a bit more of a literal meaning because I'm responding to a YouTube channel that goes by Cereal in Boxes. So in this video, Mr. Cereal here is responding to a video from Shane Killian, in which Shane Killian responds to a video created by Adam Something, in which Adam Something basically argues that believing in libertarianism is some kind of slippery slope to believing in the alt-right. Now, if you've been following my channel, you'll know that I've also responded to this exact same video. So I figured this is something I might as well take a look at. Also, I just love adding another layer to that response lasagna. Delicious.
Why do I think that libertarians, right libertarians to be specific, are fascists?
Because you can't actually refute the nap? Because you can't respond to it rationally? Because you're engaging in confession through projection?
Later in this video,
Wow, that was a full 2 seconds of dead audio before the guy's voice actually kicked in. Not to mention that this guy can't come up with any rant sona or avatar, or any sort of visual effects to try and maintain the audience's attention other than a blank screen. Yeah, this is some real Hollywood quality editing right here. Martin Scorsese better watch out for this guy.
you will see that Shane Killian is the one that engages in confession through projection.
Oh boy, and I just can't wait to see you demonstrate this.
Libertarianism has become an integral part of the Republican Party.
Since when? Oh, let me guess. Anyone who disagrees with you is all in the same category, right?
What about the part where Republicans want a free market and want very little regulations and stuff like that?
You'll often hear libertarians be described as agreeing with conservatives on economic issues and agreeing with liberals on social issues. And while this might be a good general rule of thumb for describing libertarianism within the mainstream bipartisan political paradigm, it's also not entirely accurate. While it is generally true that libertarians and conservatives agree on economic issues, there are actually quite a few economic policies conservatives advocate for that libertarians are against, such as protectionist, isolationist policies like tariffs and immigration restrictions, bloated military and police budgets, bailouts and subsidies for big corporations. While on the surface it might be tempting to lump together libertarian and conservative economic policies, it's also not entirely accurate.
They might not believe in the non-aggression principle, but they surely believe in classical liberalism, which is just libertarianism without the nap.
Yes, it's true that libertarians and conservatives tend to agree on economic issues, but that doesn't mean they're the same thing. Conservatives disagree with libertarians on a lot of other policy areas, such as immigration, drug legalization, abortion, LGBT issues, and even in areas where we do agree, we usually agree for different reasons. Conservatives and libertarians both want low taxes and regulations, but conservatives want this because it benefits their personal interests, whereas libertarians believe this because we take a principled stand against the initiation of violence. The point that Shane was trying to make there isn't that there aren't areas where conservatives and libertarians agree, but rather the fact that there are areas where these two ideologies might overlap doesn't make them the same thing. That's the point that Shane was trying to make, and it appears to have gone over your head.
Republican politicians have abandoned their opposition to same-sex marriage.
Now there's a claim that aged like sour milk. Conservative media has been in an absolute frenzy lately over Joe Biden's decision to codify same-sex marriage into federal law. You had conservatives claiming that this is going to be the end of marriage, the family, and American society as we know it. Now, I don't like Joe Biden. I think the guy's a tyrannical scumbag, but this is one decision on his part that I do actually agree with.
Also, it's funny that you're accusing Adam Something of grouping anyone he dislikes in the same category when libertarians call anyone they don't like a statist.
Mr. Strawman, give me a break.
What libertarians have been doing this? Can you maybe provide some examples? I mean, I can't speak on behalf of anyone else, but me personally, when I use the term statist, I'm simply referring to anyone who believes in any form of government. If you believe that society should have a government, some sort of central organizational structure, whatever variety, type, or form it may happen to take, then you're a statist. Which, by the way, you can be a libertarian and a statist. For example, I describe myself as a libertarian statist. I am a minarchist. I think society would be better off off with some basic form of organizational structure. However, while I do believe that government should exist, I also believe that it should be A, voluntarily funded, and B, only use coercion to enforce the non-aggression principle. This goes back to a point I've discussed in a lot of my previous videos, people conflating libertarianism and anarchism. Just because I don't want the government to micromanage every little aspect of my life doesn't mean I don't think there should be a government at all.
So there appears to be some definite connection between the far right and right libertarianism.
Only in your deluded imagination.
When I say right-wing libertarian, I don't mean people who fit the definition of right-wing libertarian.
You don't say.
I mean people who identify as right-wing libertarian.
Even if you could show this, how is it any kind of refutation at all? How someone identifies has nothing to do with the reality of the situation or how defensible a particular position is. You titled your video, "Right Libertarians Are Just Fascists." And now, here you are, basically admitting you have nothing to back up that assertion with.
So as you can see there, we just had close to a minute of completely unedited video. This is a big faux pas that you want to avoid when making response videos. When making a response video, you don't want long segments of unedited video between interjections, because this can cause the audience to become disengaged, not to mention make the video longer than it needs to be. A good general rule of thumb to follow: if there's something in the original video you feel you don't have a response for, best to just edit it out.
I think Shane is confused. The main argument that Adam Something is trying to make is that most of the main ideals of right libertarianism devolves into fascism really quickly. It's kind of like the 1984 phrase, "war is peace." They're not saying that war is actually peace, but that war leads to peace. Also, Adam Something puts quotation marks around the word libertarian in his title.
So this is an issue that both Shane and I brought up in both of our responses to Adam Something's video. The way that Adam Something phrases not only the title of his video, but also the thesis argument that he makes it seem as if he's trying to argue that libertarians are equivalent to the far right. That's the impression that someone would have gotten going into this video, if they didn't know any other context surrounding the video. So this came across to both Shane and myself as a way to disingenuously mask over the fact that he can't provide any support to justify this position. So he had to do what's called a Mott and Bailey, bring in an easier to defend argument to hide his argument behind. If Adam Something was trying to make the argument that the core principles of libertarianism provide ideological support to the far right, as opposed to trying to argue that they're equivalent, then there are ways he could have phrased that more clearly from the onset to make it more clear that that's the position he was trying to argue. I understand that that was sort of the intention of putting the word libertarian in quotes in the title, but again, without additional context to accompany what Adam Something is trying to argue in the video, it's unlikely that anyone would pick up on that.
Title.
And so, do the following names sound familiar to you? Richard Spencer, Milo Yiannopoulos, Gavin McInnes, Tim Gionnet aka Baked Alaska, Stefan Molyneux, Ben Shapiro. All of these people are far-right demagogues.
And none of them are libertarians or even identify as libertarians like you claim. You just want them to be, because again, you have nothing you can use against us.
Are you sure about that?
If the scale is correct in any way, I will end up in the right libertarian category. I mean, that's obviously where I am.
So I mentioned this in my response to Adam's video, but Ben Shapiro is a bad example of someone on the far right. If you actually watch Ben's content and understand the positions he usually takes on various issues, you'll know that he's actually very moderately right. Ben Shapiro is actually in favor of people having the freedom to do a lot of things he disagrees with, such as be in a same-sex relationship, watch pornography, get a sex transition. Adam Something's decision to take Ben Shapiro, someone who's very clearly moderate right, and label him as far right strikes me as very bizarre, especially when you have people like Matt Walsh and Michael Knowles who want to, among other things, ban pornography, even for consenting adults, ban same-sex marriage, ban sex change operations, even for consenting adults, ban drag shows, restrict how people can express their gender identity. Like, of all the far-right fascist people out there Adam Something could have picked to get his point across, Ben Shapiro isn't even in the top 10.
And so it seems to me that there is such a thing as the libertarian alt-right pipeline.
When there isn't, and I've debunked that several times before.
There is a libertarian alt-right pipeline because white people have a lot of privilege.
Wow, way to go with the racism there, buddy. Making broad generalizations about people based on their skin color. Do all white people have special privileges? Like, I'm white and I don't feel like I have any special privileges. And what exactly are these privileges that white people have? These are claims that I hear people make up and down a blue streak but never provide an explanation for.
And libertarianism does nothing to solve systemic racism.
This one is partially correct. Libertarianism doesn't solve racism or any other problem for that matter, because libertarianism isn't providing a solution to your problems, it's providing you a framework to figure them out for yourself. This often confuses a lot of statists, because a lot of them are used to that whole mindset of one person's going to come along and have some kind of master plan that will solve all of our problems for us. And libertarianism is pretty much the only political ideology that rejects that sort of master plan type of thinking. We're not saying we know the best way to build roads, provide education, deal with crime, etc. We're claiming quite the opposite actually, that no one organization or person in society knows the best way to address these problems, so it's on individuals to figure it out for themselves. There's no longer a mommy or daddy government to go to bitch to, so now you have to figure your problems out for yourself. Statists often don't like this idea because it means they have to take responsibility instead of just throwing it onto the state, which is much easier. But solutions that come about through innovation and people working together are typically better than those centrally planned by government.
Which would essentially make it as passively racist as conservatism.
Hey pal, you just blowing from Stupid Town?
Wait, how can something be passively racist? I mean, racism is inherently active. In order to be racist, you have to hold beliefs and opinions about certain ethnic groups, and that's something you actively have to do, so I don't understand how something can be passively racist. This seems like meaningless jargon just being thrown around.
The beginning and middle parts of the alt-right pipeline, which is conservatism and the alt-light.
I know this is somewhat of a semantic nitpick, but if it's a libertarian to alt-right pipeline, wouldn't libertarianism be the beginning of the pipeline? And conservatism being the middle and end of the pipeline?
Also, it doesn't do anything to solve systemic racism and racial inequality.
Even if we assume that it's true, that libertarianism doesn't do anything about racism, that still doesn't mean that libertarianism is equivalent to conservatism. Just because two ideologies might have areas where they overlap doesn't make them the same thing. You also seem to be conflating the fact that we don't have a master plan to deal with racism with us not caring about racism, which, I mean, it is conceivable that there are libertarians out there who would, for example, be in favor of boycotting businesses that discriminate or setting up charities to support communities of color. Just because we don't have some big overarching master plan for how a problem should be dealt with doesn't mean we don't have any solutions to the problem at all. Did you really just leave in the clicking sound after you ended the recording? Like really, dude, you can't even be bothered to just trim your audio?
And why is that? Well, if you're a libertarian, allegedly, chances are you will be against programs such as affirmative action, state welfare, anti-discrimination legislation.
Because they're all forms of aggression that can't be defended ethically?
But somehow wealth inequality is justified, right?
Red herring.
Wow, way to completely avoid addressing the point that Shane made. But since you did bring up the issue of wealth inequality, let's discuss it anyways. Now, of course, in a free society, you're going to have different distributions of wealth. Some people work harder than others, some people choose to go into more demanding professions than others, some people might choose to invest instead of spending their money. Wealth inequality is just going to be a natural part of a free society. That being said, wealth inequality can grow egregiously wide, to the point that only a handful of rich people have most of the wealth and most working class people struggle just to get by. And when this happens, the free market usually gets the blame, and not the special privileges that the wealthy get from the government, such as handouts and subsidies, regulations making it harder to compete with them.
In general, it seems to me that far-righters and libertarians have an awful lot in common, and that's because they both believe in this thing called personal responsibility.
Would that were the case on the far right, but I'll take it for us libertarians. Now maybe you want to explain why that's a bad thing.
The far right and the alt-right both believe in personal responsibility because they believe that the reason POC are inferior to white people.
Nigga, what?
Wait, who's arguing that POC are inferior to white people? I'm certainly not. I believe that people of color have the same capability of succeeding and overcoming challenges in life just as much as any white person. People on the left obviously don't agree with me on that, since they seem to argue that people of color can only succeed in our society if they're sucking on the tits of government. Which side really believes that people of color are inferior to white people? The people who encourage them to be independent or dependent on the state?
is because they're more poor and commit more crime.
So first of all, you seem to be lumping all non-white people together. There are actually groups such as Asians, Muslims, and Indians that actually perform better on average than white people when it comes to metrics such as employment, income, and upward mobility. By the way, just a quick clarification, when I say Indians, I mean people from the country of India, as opposed to Native Americans, which is another racial group that term is often used to refer to, but anyways, regardless, back on subject. It is true that statistically speaking, there are ethnic groups that are poorer or commit more crimes on average than white people, but we're not saying this is because they're inherently inferior. There are various social, economic, and political factors that contribute to this discrepancy. Not all of it can be chalked up to racism. Another thing to point out is that white people who live in those same communities often face the same struggles. So we're not saying that people of color are poorer or commit more crimes than white people because they're inferior to white people. We're saying that factors other than race are contributing to those issues.
By doing this, they are implying that minorities are at fault for being more poor, which is essentially personal responsibility.
People who advocate for personal responsibility aren't necessarily trying to make the argument that poor people and minorities are entirely or even mostly at fault for their circumstances. What we're arguing is that having a defeatist attitude and not doing anything to improve their situation is just going to make it worse. For example, I have autism. It makes certain aspects of life more difficult for me, and it's not even something that I'm at fault for. You know, it's not something I asked for, it's just something I ended up with. Now, I don't sit there and bitch about it though. Instead, I bust my ass and do my best to overcome whatever challenges I face.
Individual responsibility means that we should solve big problems through small individual changes instead of systemic approaches. The system isn't broken, the individual people are.
There is no system. There is no society. There really isn't even any people. The only things there are individuals. Words like people, society, and systems are abstractions that are there to explain aggregate action. What happens when groups of people, either in an organized fashion or through the standalone effect, end up working for a common goal or result in certain trends? So the only thing that can be broken is individuals.
Just debating semantics.
I'm not sure if anyone else has noticed this, but this guy's audio balancing is, in the nicest way I can put it, not that great. I'm finding myself constantly having to adjust the volume every time the video switches between Adam, Shane, and Mr. Serial. Ideally, you want to try and have a consistent audio level throughout the video. Admittedly, this can be a bit difficult to pull off, and I struggle with it myself from time to time, truth be told, but I think this guy could benefit massively from like an editing 101 course.
The definition of those words are completely irrelevant to what Adam Something is talking about here. Adam Something's point about libertarians not believing that systemic change is necessary is still valid.
Well, I mean, if you're going to make the argument that individual solutions are inefficient to solve these problems and we need systemic solutions, then yeah, I think it is pretty relevant that Adam Something provide a definition for the difference between the two. As I brought up this same issue in my response, but I phrased it a bit differently from the way that Shane phrased it. I brought up the issue that systems and societies are made up of individuals, so trying to treat the two as if they're somehow different entities is inherently nonsensical. This is why the definition of terms like society and system are important here, because without a definition for what terms like society and systemic mean, and more importantly what differentiates this from an individual or individualist solution, what Adam is saying here is basically a bunch of meaningless gibberish.
You know, if you have 10,000 black people living in a ghetto somewhere, the systemic solution to black poverty would be targeted social programs,
which don't work. The real solution, as we've seen over and over again, is to set them free to live, work, and form their own businesses. Those societal programs, as economists like Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams have shown, did in 10 years what Jim Crow couldn't do in 100. Destroy the black family and turn blacks from the most upwardly mobile group in America to ones mired in intergenerational poverty.
How do social programs that give people money and stuff cause more harm to black people than segregation?
Because it encourages black people to be dependent on the state and discourages them from becoming independent.
It seems like Shane compares anything he doesn't like to things that were extremely terrible.
But Shane isn't just arbitrarily making these comparisons just to make whatever he's criticizing look bad. He's actually drawing a logical connection between the two. If black people are dependent on the state, then they're easier to control than they would be if they were fully independent. This is how the goals of welfare programs and Jim Crow segregation are in line with each other. That's the entire point that Shane was trying to make.
Also saying just get a job ignores all the systemic racism involved in hiring and stuff like that.
Hiring bias isn't necessarily a problem that only affects people of color, however. A lot of you are probably familiar with that study that shows that job applications with a black-sounding name are less likely to get a call back than job applications with a more white-sounding name. This is true. However, one aspect of the study they often won't tell you about is that white people with similarly ethnic or non-traditional sounding names are also at a disadvantage. So again, this is something being labeled a race issue when it's actually not. So how do we overcome hiring bias anyways? Well, it's actually very simple. Just get rid of minimum wage, mandatory benefits, and all the other regulations that reduce the number of jobs. That way the applicant pool that employers have to draw from will be smaller and they'll have no choice but to be less picky about who they hire.
Oh, and by the way, ghettos are the result of government housing projects, social programs of the left. So nice try.
Source? Shane likes to blame every bad thing on government programs without proof.
Well, I mean, it's kind of common sense. If you're going to funnel all of your poor in the one part of the city, instead of giving them opportunities to seek out housing on their own with everyone else, ghettos are sort of the inevitable consequence of that.
He would roll up in his Bentley and tell those people to start a business or something, which is basically just the equivalent of hand-waving the issues of those people.
No, it is not. It's the only way that's been shown to work.
Wait, what? Telling people to just start a business every time they're struggling is essentially telling those people that the reason why they're poor is because they haven't started a business, and that if they were to start a business, everything would be solved. How is that not hand-waving their problems?
We're not necessarily saying that they have to start a business, just that they should take some sort of responsibility and initiative to improve their circumstances. This could include starting a business, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It could mean simply getting a job. It could mean just looking for a job. It could even mean just utilizing whatever support resources you have at your disposal, such as a vocational program.
And also, how does it work? You need a lot of money to start a business.
Not always. It depends on what kind of business you're trying to start. Want to start a car washing business? All you need is a bucket, a sponge, some soap, a hose, and a towel. Want to start a landscaping business? All you need are some basic garden tools and you're in business. And the thing is, we libertarians actually want to make it as cheap as possible to start a business. Right now, under government, if you want to start a business, you have to fill out a bunch of forms, pay for a bunch of paperwork, pay fees for licenses and permits. Even for something as simple as just braiding hair or serving lemonade on the street corner. We want to make it as easy as possible to start a business.
And even then, your business could fail.
Yeah, but you could also fail trying to get a job too. What, people shouldn't try succeeding in life because they could possibly fail if they do so? What kind of quitter defeatist attitude is that? Yeah, failure is part of life. You brush yourself off, you get back up, and you keep going at it until eventually you succeed.
And again, it's funny how you're pretending like it's the libertarians who are rich and privileged when the rich are much more likely to be socialist and the poor and working class are much more likely to be conservatives or libertarians. I'd love to hear just one of you morons explain why that's the case.
Do you know that poor people tend to vote for the Democratic Party more than the Republican Party in the United States? The Democratic Party is still right-wing, but it's less right-wing than the Republican Party, which means that the poor and working class are more likely to vote for more pro-regulation parties.
You got a source for that claim, my dude? This guy's been criticizing Shane for making claims without backing them up with sources, so it kind of makes sense to expect that this guy would put his money where his mouth is and provide sources of his own. And even if this was true, it doesn't mean these policies are a good idea. Politicians can often use deception to get people to vote for stuff that actually works against their own interests. So just because a bunch of people in a particular group might be voting for something doesn't mean that that's good for them.
Like, yeah, whatever, just start a business or something.
Well, it's not that difficult.
In order to start a business, you need thousands, if not tens, or even hundreds of thousands of dollars to get the building and the materials set up. And also you need a lot of planning so the business would sell a product that people actually want, so the business survives. Now imagine you're very poor. How would you be able to start a business then?
Well, you don't have to buy the commercial space outright. You can lease it, which is a lot cheaper, or even operate out of your home. A lot of the biggest companies on the planet, Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft, all began in someone's garage. There have been plenty of successful businesses that have been started on a minimal budget with minimal resources, so it can be done.
At least it wouldn't be without your holy government breathing down their necks, destroying their job opportunities with a eugenics program of minimum wage, destroying their communities with a fascist war on drugs, and inhibiting their business creation with the fascist eugenics programs of zoning, occupational licensing, and hideous overregulation.
I agree with Shane that the war on drugs is stupid, but how is it fascist? And how is zoning fascist?
Because these are policies that further centralize control of the economy with the government. The term fascism was coined by Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. It comes from a Latin word meaning bundle, and that's sort of what it means. The government is bundling up aspects of their economy or the lives of their citizens to be within their control.
And that's because if you subscribe to the idea of personal responsibility, then chances are you believe that the system we have currently is fine or mostly fine.
What are you talking about? I just listed several ways you fascist, eugenicist leftists have used aggression to make a system that inhibits the entrepreneurship and upward mobility of poor communities, which is by design, by the way, since the progressive movement came out of the eugenics movement.
Libertarians are economically the same as conservatives in the sense that they don't believe that systemic change is necessary and that we should just keep things the way that it is. Is that not true?
Once again, you're failing to actually address the point that Shane Killian brings up. Adam Something tried making the argument that libertarians want to preserve the status quo. Shane Killian, in my opinion, delivered a very well-put response to that claim. Not only did Killian refute the claim that libertarians want to maintain a status quo, but also very thoroughly explained how many of the issues that poor and minority communities are facing in our country were created, or at the very least contributed to, by various policies that Adam Something advocates for. And instead of actually addressing the point that Shane Killian made, you're just repeating the same argument that's been debunked before, that libertarians and conservatives must be the same because they agree on economic policies. Before you go making a video trying to debunk someone, maybe you should, I don't know, try and understand the point they're actually making.
Hey, would you look at that? Sounds like these right-wing libertarians really want to conserve the current system. So if the darkies get too uppity in Detroit that they're poor and they have no opportunities...
Detroit has been controlled by the progressive left for well over half a century. Imagine that.
Well, it's their problem. They're just lazy. They don't want to work.
Mr. Strawman, give me a break.
What? How is that a straw man? That's literally the second thing that right libertarians say after, it's the government's fault. They essentially think that if you can't afford water, it's your fault.
It's a straw man because we're not claiming that the problem is that these people are lazy and don't want to work. People being lazy and not wanting to work might be a contributing factor, but it's certainly not the entirety of the issue. There are various complex social, political, and economic reasons why a community might suffer from poverty. And just as it would be an oversimplification to boil it all down to racism, it would also be an oversimplification to boil it all down to laziness. That there is no one singular factor contributing to the poverty experienced in these communities is exactly the point we're trying to make.
And if some soy-chugging cocked lefty points out that, hey, by the way, there's been systemic discrimination against black people...
We're not denying there's been systemic discrimination against black people. It's just being done by you leftists, which is why you're so desperate to blame everyone else.
Which leftist is doing the discrimination? There was colonization and past oppression, which causes a wealth inequality among races.
So you do realize that a lot of the Jim Crow policies, such as mandatory segregation, poll taxes, etc., were all things supported by Democrats back in the day. And while the most heinous examples of this are a thing of the past, there are still remnants of Jim Crow around today, such as minimum wage, which disproportionately disemploys blacks, property taxes, which keep blacks stuck in shitty schools, zoning and gentrification, which keep blacks stuck in shitty neighborhoods, social security, which is basically a black to white wealth transfer system, and of course let's not forget the reason that gun control was originally conceived, so that black people wouldn't be able to defend themselves from KKK lynchings. Not only did leftists fail to recognize that these policies disproportionately harm people of color, but they continue to advocate for them vigorously to this day.
And conservatives are keeping systemic racism by not enacting policies to solve the problem.
Like what? What specific policies are there that conservatives are refusing to implement that you believe would solve the problem? Provide an explanation to back up your claim.
And since you're not denying that there's systemic discrimination against black people, you're essentially saying there's a problem, but we're completely fine with it existing and we don't think it's necessary to solve it. Which, given the context is about systemic racism, this makes you a racist.
Wait, what? So Shane points out that a lot of the policies that Adam Something is calling for are actually a lot of the contributing factors to racism and wealth inequality in our society, and from this you somehow draw the conclusion that Shane doesn't want to do anything about racism and therefore is a racist. Yeah, care to walk me through your thought process there, buddy?
Redlining policies,
Call it what it is. Zoning. A policy of the left.
ramming highways through neighborhoods,
Another leftist policy.
the disproportionate incarceration of black people for non-violent drug crimes.
Funny how libertarians are pretty much the only ones against the war on drugs. How are you gonna blame us for that?
Okay, I actually agree with Shane on this one. It's unfair to blame libertarians for something that they're against. However, libertarians oppose systemic change when it comes to black people getting disproportionately incarcerated for other things, so Adam Something's main point still applies.
Well, I mean, I'm glad you do at least acknowledge that we're against the war on drugs, but you somehow still want to pin the disproportionate incarceration of black people onto libertarians. I think most libertarians would probably agree with a lot of the criticisms the left makes against our justice system. I think we do incarcerate way too many people here in the United States, and I would like to see a transition towards more effective forms of punishment, such as community service or rehabilitation programs.
Breaks up families and ruins communities.
Welfare state.
All of these concerns can be just hand-waved, dismissed with personal responsibility.
No, all of these are your fault, as we've shown over and over and over again.
Proof?
How come all these black people seem to be unable to succeed in this meritocratic fair society created by white people?
Because it's not. It's a racist eugenics system created by you leftists.
Again, no proof, just claiming, asserting, and projecting.
Okay, I will admit this is a fair criticism. Shane should have probably left some links to sources in the description of the video. That being said, it's not like these aren't subjects that Shane hasn't covered before on his channel. For example, Shane has made a video called How to Argue for Social Security, which debunks a lot of the arguments that people make in favor of the welfare state. It's a very well-researched video and covers a lot of data.
Hey, would you look at that? From one of the biggest foundational principles of libertarianism, we have organically arrived at white nationalist talking points.
Oh, shut up.
Shane just implied that he has nothing to say here, so he's just saying that because his audience likes to hear what they think is Shane completely destroying the person he's refuting. Adam Something made a completely valid point, and Shane can't find a response to it.
So I don't blame Shane for being frustrated here, since Adam Something is basically just repeating a bunch of bullshit that's been debunked before. Was that the most effective way Shane could have refuted his point? Maybe not. But it is frustrating having to constantly debunk the same bad argument over and over and over again.
And so, if you are a person with empathy and a good understanding of the world, you realize that currently, in certain areas of life, especially in America, systemic change is needed to bring about more happiness and better outcomes. And that requires state social policies.
And that's all you need to see that Adam Something is just another leftist, racist, fascist liar.
Shane is just accusing people of being all these bad things when he has no proof of it, and he's just doing this to please his audience.
Hey dude, did you watch Shane's video before you made this response? Because Shane explains how a lot of the arguments that Adam Something makes are racist and fascist. In fact, you don't even have to watch Shane's video. You can just watch the original video made by Adam Something and know that a lot of the claims he's making are racist. There's this assumed inferiority to black people in almost all the arguments that he makes, which, not gonna lie, is making me pretty uncomfortable. Here's a bit of advice for you, buddy. Before you go making a video claiming that you've debunked somebody, maybe you should understand what exactly it is you're trying to debunk. Because it seems like a lot of the claims that Shane made in this video went completely over his head. That, and maybe take an editing class. This has been Philosophossum, making stupidity play dead. Everyone take care.